Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports and Our Football video, and today I'm going over my 2023 NFL Power Rankings for Week 1 of the season. I do this every single week on the channel. This was a very exciting first week of the season. A lot of games went the way people expected them, but there was a few games that didn't. And there's a decent amount of movement for Week 1, but a lot of teams stayed fairly stable. So let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire as always. At 32, we have the Arizona Cardinals. At 31, we have the Panthers. At 30, we have the Texans. And at 29, we have the Bears. The Cardinals were 32 before this week, and the Panthers were 30. And I believe Houston was 28. Houston had a pretty bad game. They played the Ravens. They basically just got beat straight up. Panthers had a pretty bad game against the Falcons. They lost 24-10. The Cardinals game was okay. They also lost, but they played a pretty decent game, and they played better than I expected them to. So I almost brought the Cardinals up, but all three of the teams lost anyways, and they're all in the dumpster fire, so I just kept them in the same order and just moved the Panthers and Texans down. As for the Bears, they were pretty decently high in my preseason predictions. I had them maybe around 25, but they dropped down to 29 because they just got dismantled by the Packers without Aaron Rodgers. All four of these teams don't look great right now. I think that there could be some potential in the Bears and the Panthers, and the Cardinals looked okay. But right now these are the four worst teams in the league. Moving on to playoff possibilities. This is a little bit of a stretch, but they are playoff possibilities. We have the Colts at 28. We have the Commanders at 27. We have the Rams at 26, the Bucs at 25, and the Steelers at 24. The odds of one of these teams making the playoffs is fairly low, but I think it's at least around 50% that one of these five makes the playoffs. The Commanders had a pretty decent game. They beat they beat the Cardinals. So the Cardinals are obviously one of the worst teams in the league, but the Commanders did come out with a victory. And that's all you can really ask for Week 1. Week 1, a lot of teams aren't playing at their best, so Washington had a pretty good game. The Colts lost to the Jaguars 31-21, but I moved them up in the power rankings simply because they looked better than I expected them to be. The Bears and the Texans looked worse, so I moved them above those two teams. And overall, the new quarterback on the Colts looks pretty decent, and I think that he could have a pretty decent season as a rookie. At 26, we have the Rams. I was high on the Rams, and then Cooper Kupp went on IR, and now they just went in and dismantled Seattle. So I don't know what to think about them. I was fairly high on them. I had them, I believe, going 7-10 or 8-9. A lot of people disagreed with that, and they also lost Cooper Kupp. And when they lost Cooper Kupp, I said the Rams are not going to be good this year. And after pulling that trigger, they immediately put up 30 on Seattle and only let them score 13. It was a very impressive game by the Rams. I'm still tentative to put them higher until we know more information about Cooper Kupp or we see them play again next week. But that was a very impressive game by the Rams. At 25, we had the Buccaneers. Another very impressive game. I think I had Tampa around 30 when I did my preseason power rankings, maybe 29, one of those spots. And in Tampa's game, they beat the Vikings. It was a close game. They beat them by 3, and the defense had a much more bend and don't break style as opposed to just playing good defense. But it worked. They only let up 17 points, even though Kirk Cousins had almost 400 yards, and they ended up winning against one of the better teams in the league. So that was a very impressive game. They moved up quite a few spots. At 24, we have the Steelers, and this was the only team here that actually decreased. Every other team increased. The Steelers went down to 24 from, I believe, around 17. They got dismantled by the 49ers. The 49ers obviously are one of the best teams in the league, but it was just a terrible showing all around. They did not play well in that game. They lost 30-7. I need to see them play good next week for me to move them back up. Next up, we have AFC Purgatory. We have the Broncos, the Titans, and the Patriots. All three of these teams I had as 8-9 or 7-10 going into the season. I figured the Patriots and the Titans are better than the Broncos, or at least more likely to be more consistent. And seeing the games today, I would agree with that assessment. I think that the Raiders are the worst opponent that any of these teams faced. I think that the Saints and the Eagles obviously are better than the Raiders. But the Patriots just played best. The Patriots played the best of these three teams. The reason why I have them at 21 is because I cannot bring myself to put the Patriots higher than 20 until Bill Belichick learns better game management or shows that he knows better game management, and we stop turning the ball and we stop getting penalties. The main reason that the Patriots had a losing record last year was because we would fumble the ball in game-losing situations, or we'd have penalties that lose us the game, or Bill Belichick would not kick a field goal when we need to kick a field goal. We saw all those things today, except the fumbles weren't at the end of the game. They're at the beginning of the game. The penalties were all in the second half in crucial drives, and Bill Belichick didn't kick the field goal that we needed to kick to be able to have an easier chance of winning. If he'd kicked the field goal in the third quarter, we would have won the game. So I think the Patriots are better than 21 as a Patriots fan, but I'm not putting us above 20 until we have better game management. The Titans and the Broncos, I just expected them to be a little bit better to start off week one. I thought that the Broncos would most likely win this game. Russell Wilson looked better than he did last year, but they still only put up 16 points. And again, if they scored 20 points every week, they win every single game. So they just need to score better on offense. And Ryan Tannehill threw 3 picks. I can't put the Titans higher than 20 until Tannehill learns how to play football again. Moving on to showed some promise. We have the Falcons at 20, the Raiders at 19, the Saints at 18, and the Packers at 17. All 4 of these teams won this week. All 4 of these teams showed a decent amount of skill. The Falcons played a divisional rival in the Panthers. They won 24-10. Both of those teams made a lot of offseason moves. I was originally leaning towards the Falcons to be the better of those two teams in the offseason. Towards the end of the offseason, I slowly moved towards the Panthers. But the Falcons just outscored them, outplayed them in every way. I think that their team was more plug and play ready. They have obviously Bijan Robinson, who came in as one of the best guys in the league, or expected to be one of the best guys in the league, and it was just an easier plug and play team. I think the Panthers have more long-term potential, but right now the Falcons are the better team. At 19 we have the Raiders, and at 18 we have the Saints. I'm kind of pairing these two teams together a little bit. Both of them won in surprise victories, in my opinion. I thought that the Titans and the Broncos would win. Although I thought they'd both be very close games. And the reason why I'm kind of pairing them together is because Derek Carr went from the Raiders to the Saints, and they both have very similar rosters. They have Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams. They both have strong running backs. They both have good defenses. But neither of them were able to find good footing last year. Now Derek Carr moved from the Raiders to the Saints, and Jimmy Garoppolo went to the Raiders. So there's two very similar quarterbacks on similar teams. I think that they're both kind of in that same area, and then they both won their games like 17-16 and 16-15. So they're kind of tied together, in my opinion, right now as like the Derek Carr teams. Derek Carr outperformed how I expected him to. So he had a good game, and I think that the Saints could be a good team if they are more consistent this year than they have been in the past. As for the Packers, they completely dismantled the Bears. I originally was thinking of putting the Packers higher in my preseason rankings. I ended up having them lower than I expected to. But after this week, I definitely am putting them back up to where I originally was going to have them, around 17. And they will definitely keep going up if they play this well every week. Jordan Love played very well. He had over 300 yards. He had a very strong performance. And overall, the Packers just played a really good game of football. They're against the Bears, who are one of the worst teams in the league. But it doesn't discredit their achievement, and I'm curious to see how they continue playing for the rest of the season. Moving on, this category is called Overreaction Monday. We have the Vikings and the Seahawks. The Vikings obviously lost to Tampa, and the Seahawks got dismantled by the Rams. I had the Seahawks higher than the Vikings in my preseason rankings, and although the Seahawks lost in a worse game, the Vikings lost to, in my opinion, preseason a better team. So, a worse team. So, it's close between these two, but they're both teams that I thought were going to be better, but really didn't play well week one. So, it's Overreaction Monday. I don't really have them that low. I both still have them in the top half. But I really need to see both of these teams to step it up next week and play good games for me to keep them in the top half of the league. Moving on, we have, this is interesting, We have the Giants at 14, the Browns at 13, the Chargers at 12, and the Ravens at 11. The Giants looked horrendous this week. The Giants looked how everyone expected them to look at the beginning of 2022, and they've reverted back to their old ways. Daniel Jones looked like Daniel Jones of the past, and they just really had a horrendous game. The Cowboys didn't do anything special. They just played solid football and capitalized on the Giants' mistakes. And they made a couple of good plays like the block field goal, but other than that, the Giants really just played horribly. I didn't put them down with the Seahawks and the Vikings in the same tier, simply because they played a better opponent than they did. But if the Giants lose another game next week and they look anywhere near how they did this week, then they're definitely going to be in the bottom half of the league going into week 3. The Browns are at 13. They played a phenomenal game against the Bengals, opposite side of the coin. They made the Bengals look like the Giants. The Bengals scored 3 points or something. It was a horrendous game. The Browns just steamrolled them. They had a really consistent approach on offense in the second half. The first half wasn't great. The second half, they had a really strong offensive rhythm, and the defense was consistent the whole game. I was wishy-washy on the Browns. I thought they could go anywhere from 12-5 to 5-12. I was leaning towards like the 7-10, 9-8 range. But they definitely play like an 11-6 team. They played very strong. And if they win another game next week, they could definitely move into the top 10. At 12, I have the Chargers, and at 11, I have the Ravens. The Ravens played a pretty strong game against the Texans, but it's the Texans. And the Chargers, I think they were 12 in my preseason ranking, so I kept them where they were. They played a pretty good game against the Dolphins. I believe the Dolphins, in my opinion, were the favorites. And the defense didn't play phenomenally, but I just kind of kept them where they were. Basically, how I expected it to go is how it went. Justin Herbert, I just need to see him win more close games against good teams before I can put the Chargers in the top 10. But they're a very strong team. They have a good offense, a good, fairly decent defense usually. They just lost the shootout today. Sorry, I meant to switch these. At number 10, we have the New York Jets, and at number 9, we have the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins obviously had a phenomenal game against the Chargers today. The defense didn't play as good as I expected it to. I thought that the defense would come out stronger. But again, one of the kind of rules of football is if it's a shootout, it's a shootout. There's not much the defense can do about it. So I don't blame either the Chargers or the Dolphins defense. The Dolphins just were able to outscore them, and they did it with style. And Tua looks like the Tua of last year. I was concerned with him coming back from injury, how he'd look. He looks phenomenal. He looks like the Dolphins did when they were a top 5 team at the beginning of last year, and I'm excited to see where this Dolphins team goes. At number 10, we have the Jets. The Jets have not played yet this week. I think 10 is a fair spot for them. They could move up to 9 if they beat the Bills. If they lose to the Bills, they probably will not move below 10. I kind of have them where they are. If they get demolished by the Bills, they might go down to 12 or 13, but I really don't see that happening. They'll probably stay where they are, most likely, no matter what happens tomorrow night. At 8, we have the Jaguars, and at 7, we have the Lions. The Jaguars played a pretty strong game today against the Colts. Richardson looked better than I expected him to. And the Colts played well, but that's not necessarily the Jaguars being bad. I think that was just the Colts playing a proficient game of football. The Jaguars won by 10. It was close at some points, but overall the Jaguars had a pretty strong handle on the game, and it was a pretty good win for the Jaguars. Jacksonville had a strong win against a not great opponent, but I kind of kept them where they were in the rankings. They may have moved up 1 spot. As for the Lions at 7, I moved them up 1 spot as well. They had a pretty solid win over Kansas City. Kansas City was obviously missing Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, so it was a depleted Kansas City team, but the Lions played a very strong game, and basically how I expected them to win. Amon-Ra St. Brown went off. Jared Goff had a good game. Josh Reynolds had a good game. Josh Reynolds has been with Jared Goff for a long time. It's good to see their connection is strong. And the new running backs that they got that they're working with went pretty good. Their running game was okay, and the defense played pretty decently. So, good game by the Lions, good game by the Jaguars, pretty strong game by the Dolphins. Moving on to Elite 2. This is the AFC Elite, and then the top 3 is the NFC Elite, as you could have probably guessed. I was surprised to see the Chiefs and the Bengals play not their best games ever. The Bengals played very poorly. The Chiefs played not great. Obviously, the Chiefs were missing Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, but they will not be back in the top 3 until at least one of those players comes back. If Kelce comes back next week and the Chiefs win their game, they'll probably be back in the top 3, but they won't be back to number 1 until they settle their contract dispute with Chris Jones. They just didn't look the same on defense, and their offense, obviously, that Kelce didn't look the same. I don't know if they would have won the game if they were both in against the Lions. They probably would have, but the Lions also may have been a little bit more urgent in their offense in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter, so you never would have known. In the Bengals game, the Bengals notoriously, as of last year, don't play great in week 1. Last year, Joe Burrow threw 4 interceptions, and everyone freaked out. But the thing is, they went into overtime, and they almost won the game. The difference this year is that instead of last year, them overcoming 4 interceptions and having a very good offensive showing, their offense did absolutely nothing the entire game. That's the difference between last year and this year. I had them at 6 tentatively. If they lose again next week, they'll probably go down to around 10. Not a great showing by the Bengals, especially after I just named them my Super Bowl pick for the season. I think that part of it is because Joe Burrow missed some reps due to his injury. So next week, if they play better and they look like the Bengals, then I'll bump them back up a little bit. Last but certainly not least, we have the elite number 1. We have the 49ers at 1, the Eagles at 2, and the Cowboys at 3. Now I know all the Cowboys fans are going to be mad at me for having them below the Eagles because the Cowboys played a tougher opponent and they played better. But the Giants just played worse. The Patriots are a worse team than the Giants in my opinion currently. But the Patriots played a very strong game of football. Like, they were very consistent. They played good. The Giants just didn't play well, and the Cowboys capitalized on their mistakes. So I think that this top 3, any of these 3 teams can be considered the number 1 team right now. I just think that the Cowboys dismantling of the Giants was a lot to do with the Giants being bad. Also, the Cowboys started off at a lower ranking than the Eagles, so the Cowboys moved up from number 6 to number 3. And the 49ers moved up to number 1, because the reason why I had them lower than the top 3 going into the season was just because I wasn't sure about Brock Purdy and how he was going to look going into the season. He looks exactly how he left off, and because of that, I have them at number 1. I would have had them at number 3, but I needed to see Brock play a game, and he looked just like he did when he left off. The offense was clicking in all cylinders. Christian McCaffrey had a phenomenal game, and this team just looks like a top 3, number 1 team. The Eagles had a pretty decent game. Could have been better. They won, but they really didn't look like the Eagles of last year. So it was a decent game overall, and they played very well. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.